Plain Talk Podcast. It's Rob Ford. I am your host, as I always am. We got another great show coming up. Katie Pinke, who is the publisher of Ag Week, which, full disclosure, Ag Week is owned by Forum Communications Company, which also signs my paychecks, full disclosure there. But Katie's on. She wrote a great column about the corporate farming ban. And the jumping off point for her column, and I wrote about this too at sayanythingblog.com, the jumping off point for her column was legislation introduced by State Representative Aaron McWilliams, a Republican from Hillsborough, which would allow second cousins to farm together. Now, that's a good thing, and it's a good bill, and I hope it passes, but I think there's a little bit of absurdity illustrated when second cousins wanting to come together to farm or to ranch requires an act of the legislature in the state of North Dakota. I think that's ridiculous. Any other type of business, if second cousins wanted to come together, or third cousins, or anybody else for that matter, wanted to come together and operate a car wash or a donut shop or any other sort of business, they could do it, no problem. But in North Dakota, in state law, corporations can only organize to farm or ranch if they have 15 or fewer shareholders, and if those shareholders are no further distant blood relatives than first cousins. Now, I think that's a problem, and I think that that's something that ought to change, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. For now, let's talk about cottage foods. Now, for those of you who follow sayanythingblog.com, for those of you who follow the North Dakota Legislature, you probably know that during the 2017 legislative session, lawmakers passed a bill. It was introduced by Representative Luke Simons, who's a Republican from Dickinson. It was HB 1433 in the 2017 session. And you may have heard of it referred to as the, quote, Food Freedom Act. And essentially what it did is it created a permissive regulatory framework that would allow for direct-to-consumer food sales. So the sorts of things that we're talking about are, think like farmers markets, except more prepared foods. Basically, we wanted to allow that to happen, but obviously we wanted to allow it in a safe way, so that people are understanding, what they're getting, and we try to minimize the risk of bad actors in the marketplace, selling people rotten food or unsafe food or anything like that. And so what Representative Simon's bill did is it, created a framework to allow for that. But not everybody liked it. The North Dakota Department of Health doesn't like it, and the grocery store industry in North Dakota doesn't like it because, believe it or not, they don't want people buying their food outside of grocery stores. So we're revisiting it for some reason in the 2019 legislative session. Senate Bill 2269, introduced by Senator Jerry Klein, he's a Republican from Fessenden, would put in place a lot of new restrictions on what the bill describes as cottage food. That's another, what we're talking about, cottage foods, I guess, is another term that's used for it. It would put in place a lot of new restrictions on that. It would outlaw a lot of homemade foods that are now legal to sell, including things like lemonade or chicken tamales or canned beets. It would also require foods that require refrigeration, right? So the sort of food that, if you buy it, you're going to have to stick it in the refrigerator to keep it. Before it could be sold to you, it'd have to be transported frozen and either sold dehydrated or frozen. And I don't know about you folks, but to me, I think a lot of the people who shop in venues like farmers markets, the sort of people who would be interested in the direct-to-consumer foods, cottage foods in the first place, are the sort of people who don't want their food to be frozen first, right? Freshness is one of the selling points. So I'm not really sure why we're doing this. From one standpoint, we could look at one that, from a certain standpoint, we could say that, the existing law hasn't been in place that long. How do we know that there's problems with it? It just passed during the 2017 legislative session. Maybe we should give that law some time to work. But above and beyond that, what is the motivations for, bringing this legislation back? And I think that we could possibly look at Senator Klein's background a little bit and see where he's coming from. Now, I'm not, trying to besmirch Senator Klein's reputation here, only to illustrate what his perspective may be on this sort of legislation. He is a former grocer. You could go to his legislative biography and you can look that up. He used to own a grocery store. He worked in that industry. He was a grocer. Also, according to his bio, he was at one time the head of the North Dakota Grocers Association. Now, the North Dakota Grocers Association doesn't like this bill. In fact, they want the bill repealed. In fact, in a newsletter from May of last year, which I actually, in my post on this at sayanythingblog.com, I actually linked to, they said that they are, quote, opposed to this bill and will work with the North Dakota Department of Health to fix or repeal this legislation. Now, I get it. The grocery business is tough. Margins are slim. One might be tempted to be sympathetic towards grocers, particularly small-town operations, which are, necessary to the health of their communities, right? I mean, it's hard to imagine any small community surviving for long if they don't even have a local grocery store, but yet increasingly becoming extinct. So I understand the plight that they're facing. They don't necessarily want their business environment, their marketplace to get any tougher. And so I want to be sympathetic to them. But then on the other hand, competition is competition. And I don't think that we should protect any incumbent businesses in the marketplace from competition. Sometimes the status quo needs disruption. If people want to get their food through direct-to-consumer sales, then they should be allowed to. And if the grocery stores don't like it, tough. Now, again, I don't see what the problem is here. I don't know that there's a real health problem with any of this. I don't know that we've had a rash of problems of people getting sick from direct-to-consumer sales. As a matter of fact, it seems like most of the time when we hear about people getting sick from the foods that they're eating, it's some national chain restaurant or national chain grocery store or national chain like produce company or something that's making the headlines. It's usually not, local farmer poisoned a bunch of people. I don't think we have a lot to worry from here. And to the extent that we do have something to worry about, the world's not a perfect place. Even heavily regulated industries, mistakes can happen. But as long as people understand what they're getting, as long as they're understanding, listen, this is the provenance of the food that you're buying. This is where it comes from. If you trust these people, if you trust the people, the source for your food, then, that's a willing seller, willing buyer situation. What business does the government have getting in the way of it? Well, I don't think they have any business getting in the way of it at all. Anyway, the bill in this session, it's Senate Bill 2269. The bill from the last session was HB 1433. Representative Luke Simons, Republican from Dickinson, was the sponsor of the original bill in 2017. Senator Jerry Klein, Republican from Fessenden, is a sponsor of the bill in this session, if you want to follow that. Now for our interview with Katie Pinke. I have Katie Pinke with me. Katie is the publisher of Ag Week, and I should mention here, we're both employed by the same company, just to get that out of the way. Full disclosure, right, Katie?
Absolutely, we are.
Katie wrote an editorial, and for people who follow sayanythingblog.com know how I feel about North Dakota's corporate farming ban. Which is to say that I think it's stupid. Even just from a free association standpoint, I think that as Americans, we should have the right to get into business with whoever we want to. If I want to get into business with my next door neighbor or my mother or anybody else for that matter to, sell umbrellas, we should be able to do that. And in North Dakota, for the most part, you can. If you want to run an auto repair business, if you want to run a lumber yard, if you want to run a taxi company, if you want to run a law firm, for the most part, you can partner with whoever you want to partner with. But when it comes to farming, you can't. North Dakota's corporate farming law is a little bit complicated, but generally, a corporation organized to farm a ranch cannot have more than 15 shareholders, and those 15 shareholders all have to be related pretty closely. They can be no further distant in their relation than first cousins. Now, Katie wrote a column recently about a bill introduced by State Representative Aaron McWilliams. He's a Republican from Hillsborough, which would, if passed, add second cousins to the list of people who can farm. Now, I think that's a good thing. I support the bill. I'm glad we're doing it. But, Katie, I think you arrived at the same conclusion that I did about it from reading your column, that this kind of illustrates how absurd the corporate farming ban is to begin with, that in order for it to be legal to farm or ranch with your second cousin, it takes an act of the state legislature.
Absolutely. Yes. So second cousins, it took me, I just had to dial back and think about my own family, which is a farming family. My parents farm in East Central North Dakota, and that's a family farm. But I had to think about, what if I wanted to farm with the cousins that originally came from the great-great-grandfathers that immigrated from Norway. So I figured out that I would be farming with my fourth cousins, who are my friends, and they live near my parents. And so it would be illegal for me to actually continue farming with the relatives that were my original North Dakotans. They were here before North Dakota was a state. But so that's why I wrote the column. I did some research and dug in a little bit on, first of all, why do we even have to include second cousins? And I read the law. I'm not a lawyer, but it was interesting for me to read the law. I also looked at, the opportunity for partnership. But again, even on the Secretary of State website, when you go to partnership, it still then references back to the corporate farming law on what a farming partnership can include.
Yeah. And again, I look at it as a free association thing, right? I mean, and when I wrote about this on the blog, one thing that I brought up was, imagine you had a great-great-grandfather and he immigrated from wherever, Germany, Norway, came to North Dakota, started a farm, successful farm. He leaves it to his sons. They leave it to their sons. But by the time you get down to where you're leaving it to cousins, that next generation can't farm anymore. How in the world is that right? That just doesn't seem just to me, Katie.
Well, farming is changed, obviously. We need more capital on our farms. We also have smaller families. It was different when small family farms were having a dozen kids. In my area where I live in South Central North Dakota and Wishick, there's still the Germans from Russia had very large families, and there was always a next generation to continue the farm. And that's just not reality anymore. So I'm pro-agriculture, and that includes all types of agriculture. And while I am in favor of House Bill 1388 to include second cousins, I think it just opens up a greater discussion in that farming has changed, families are smaller, farming requires a lot more capital, that I think farming should be treated like any business, and that is you can be partners and have shareholders with whoever you need or want to have that makes the best business sense for you. And it might not be your first or second cousin.
Right. Well, in some ways, you would think that would open the door to more capital, right? Like if I could say, if I'm at a farm and I don't have anybody in my family who's got capital to invest and help me buy equipment or whatever, maybe I could go to like a college roommate who's not in farming at all. Maybe he's a lawyer in Minneapolis, but he's good friends and he thinks I've got a good business model and he thinks I'm a good investment and he'll invest and he'll give me some capital and we're partners and however we want to structure our business. And I can go out there. I mean, we're talking all the time about how farmers struggle to get capital and it's such a risky business. And yet we have this corporate farming ban that to me doesn't look, and I want to get more into that aspect in a moment because I'm not sure what it's accomplishing. But to me, it looks like the one thing it is accomplishing is narrowing the pool of available capital.
Absolutely. And I look at it also as a small business owner. My husband and I are small business owners and have taken over a lumber yard, which you referenced, as we have the ability, and we have a home building business. We have the ability to partner and have investors of any type in our small business in a rural location. And if I were to go back to my parents' farm, I wouldn't have that same freedom. And I love the family farm. I love the aspect of it, but I think we have to look at the numbers, and 97% of farms nationwide are family owned. So there is a majority family owning it, but they may need, like you said, extra capital from the outside or a distant relative or a college roommate, like you said. So I just think we need to open that up and take a greater look at it of how can we continue agriculture into not just a next generation, but for many future generations. I'm the first of the fifth generation that lived and worked on our farm, and I hope that we have far more generations to come. But it's going to have to change and look differently than it has in the past.
In your column for Ag Week, which was also picked up and run, I'm reading it here in the Jamestown Sun, but it was picked up and run in a bunch of newspapers across the state. You referenced the fact that the corporate farming ban was on the ballot not too recently, and not a full repeal of the ban, just a little bit of a rollback of it in two areas for dairy farmers and for swine. The legislature passed a bill that created an exemption. Or I should say a little bit of an exemption, but a very limited exemption for dairy farmers and swine farmers. And North Dakota Farmers Union went out and they paid some petition signature collectors and they referred the issue to the ballot. And then 75% of North Dakotans voted against that exemption. And so a lot of people are pointing that and say, well, the corporate farming ban is very popular. I think that's a little bit misleading in that if you remember the 2016 election cycle, the lawmakers who were behind the bill, once it got referred, didn't exactly spend a lot of time out there making the case for it. And so North Dakota Farmers Union basically ran a marketing campaign in a vacuum. Nobody heard an affirmative, few people heard an affirmative argument for the exemption, and it went down in flames. That is what it is. But a lot of people point to that and say, well, the corporate farming ban in North Dakota is very popular. A lot of the messaging we hear about it is, well, we're protecting small family farms. And if we get rid of it, these big farming giants are going to come in and they're going to buy up all the land, and it's going to be this corporate hegemony, and that's what it's going to be. And I don't know, Katie, we're the only state in the union with a corporate farming ban at this point. And I look at the other states, and they seem to be doing okay, which is something you put a lot of data. Like, you spent some time researching this with data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You looked at other states. They don't look that much different from us, Katie.
I did, and I went to NASS, the National Ag Statistics with USDA, and it's 2017 numbers. I know that it's even probably less than what it is in my column, but I needed some hard numbers to look. And of course, I don't want any giant coming in and buying out, land from our family farmers. I don't want to see farms fail. And I needed some numbers to give me some sense of what does it look like. And I think, not to open up a whole nother can of worms with you, but it ties into other things such as the trade issues that we have going on right now and basis that we have in our pricing in North Dakota. So there's an element of animal agriculture. I'm very pro-animal ag, and I wanted to see, is North Dakota's law helping our farms or is it hurting it? And so there are 8 other states that have some form of corporate farming law. Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma.
But they're all scaled back. Nobody has what North Dakota has today.
Yeah, and Iowa. So nothing. Like, North Dakota is by far the most restrictive. And from what I could find, the only one that didn't have an exemption for livestock. And that's where I see the opportunity. All these extra corn and soybeans that we have on our farms right now in North Dakota that aren't being exported right now, they could be feeding animals. And so I look at that. So that's why I dug into those numbers, those statistics. And what I found was, North Dakota and South Dakota, similar amounts of farms, but Iowa, Minnesota, more than double, almost triple from North Dakota to Iowa in number of farms, much smaller farms in Iowa. But those animal agriculture numbers are what just blow us out of the water. And so I looked at it as, let's open this up in the future for more than second cousins, because it looks to me by the numbers, we need the exemption to allow animal agriculture growth, which in turn would add more value to the grains that we're growing in North Dakota to feed the animals.
Well, you create more of a market for those grains right here in the state.
Absolutely. And then the farmers aren't paying, they're not having the basis price to get the crop out of the state to have some type of value added, done something else elsewhere with it. We, I think, as North Dakotans would want to do as much with our agriculture products and animals here in the state. It's the value add aspect. So I think the numbers show it, and I highlighted that in the column just to give us all an idea of what we're dealing with. That, ultimately Minnesota has just as many dairy goats as we have dairy cows. That was shocking to me. Minnesota has 455,000 dairy cows, and we have 15,000 dairy cows, and we have 147,000 pigs in the state of North Dakota, and Iowa has 22 million. And so I think that we have to look at that. I think there are many people that care deeply about this issue in North Dakota, and they're working diligently to try to grow agriculture and animal agriculture and value added, but we've hit some roadblocks that need to be fixed.
Yeah, I look at this, and essentially when I look at other states, I see that the horrible things that people say will happen in North Dakota if we roll back or get rid of the corporate farming ban haven't happened in other states. As a matter of fact, by some measures, and particularly animal agriculture, like you're referring to, seems to be doing better in other states. And so what confuses me, and I realize that I'm asking you to sort of make, I don't want you to put words in North Dakota Farmers Union's mouth, because they're sort of the big bad bully on the block that's standing, in defense of the corporate farming ban. Obviously you can't make their case for them, but you're the publisher of Ag Week. You hear a lot of people out there. Why are they still standing behind this? I mean, what's the motivation for keeping the status quo in place and being unwilling to even consider, starting to maybe carve out some exemptions in the existing law?
I don't have that answer. I have many friends that are passionate Farmers Union and passionate Farm Bureau members, and so they're on either side of the issue. I tend to lean to the let's open it up, because I don't see the family farm being preserved in the way that we're portraying it. So a marketing campaign, I worked for an advertising agency for a decade of my life, and I understand a great campaign. So corporate farming sounds big, bad, and ugly, but ultimately I am pro-corporate farming in the fact that I want all farms to have the same freedom as any small business. And I am not necessarily anti-family farming. Of course, 97% of farms are already family-owned nationwide. I think in North Dakota that would remain even higher, probably. I don't see that we're going to have some big rollout of corporate farms across North Dakota. One being today, it's minus 30. So across the state, I mean, it's just not feasible for a lot of people. But I don't know on Farmers Union other than it's their history, it's where they've come from, and they've protected a law that's been intact since 1932. It's a part of their history of who they are. But looking at the next generation, and we have farmers that want to get started. We have young people, men and women, who want to be a next generation on a farm, and they don't have a family connection. And they don't have a dad or a mom or a grandpa or somebody passing a farm down to them, and they don't have the capital to get into it. So how can we loop in these next generation agriculturists to be a part of farms and ranches in North Dakota? And, like you said, they might be your college roommate. They might not be your cousin. And I think we have to, I don't want to say kumbaya here, but we're going to have to join hands and quit fighting each other on it, and really look at the whole of what's good, what's the best for North Dakota agriculture and ultimately business.
North Dakota as a state is not that old, right? I mean, you go back, statehood, obviously over a century, and I mean, even the corporate farming ban, I think, is like 100 years old going on or something like that. I don't know.
I think it's 1932.
But like compared to like European civilization, we're not that old. We haven't been around that long. I mean, it's my great grandparents, homesteaded near Ryder, North Dakota from Norway. It's not that long ago. My grandmother remembered, her dad farming with horses. So I think sometimes we think that this was a long time ago, and really it wasn't that long ago. And so, I feel like this corporate farming ban was based at a time when most of the people who were farming in North Dakota homesteaded here. Like, it was families, and they homesteaded here, and everybody stayed really close to home, and maybe it worked to keep it. But we don't live in those times anymore. Agriculture's not so closed off. I think especially with younger farmers, it's a struggle. In fact, there's another bill before the legislature, and I'm forgetting who the primary sponsor was or what the bill number is. But essentially what it does, it gives an income tax credit to people who are willing to rent farms or rent farmland or ranch land to young operators, right? Because there's a problem with young operators getting their foot in the door, getting into the marketplace. And I suspect that the corporate farming ban is a part of that problem, in that they either have to be a solo operator, or their pool of people that they could partner with is their blood relatives, which may not be that big, particularly when you think of family sizes today, which there aren't that many people who are having even 4, 5, or 6 kids anymore. So that's a real obstacle.
Yeah. The bill is House Bill 1476.
All right. See, you're more on top of it than I am.
It's John Knutson on agweek.com had a
That's where I read it. Yeah. See, I read Ag Week.
Yes, I'm glad. Thank you.
I read everything.
Good. I'm glad. And it's important for us to cover the news of that. And so there is need for beginning farmers. And like I said, I think that we're going to have to probably stop fighting each other and look at what is the good and best moving forward for the whole of agriculture. And of course, we're going to have differences, but allowing some exemptions. And I said in the column, this is a baby step. And if allowing second cousins saves a few farms in 2019, by all means, let's pass it. House Bill 1388, let's go. Let's vote to include second cousins. Yeah. But again, greater issues here that we're going to have to look, like you said, the beginner farmers.
Right. Well, and especially as time goes on, those families are going to get farther and farther apart from great-great-grandpa who founded the farm. As you move down the family tree, not everybody in the family tree is going to want to work on the farm, but some of them might, and they're going to be more and more distant relations, and, the law is going to become more of a problem. So at some point, we're going to have to do more than just add. I support adding second cousins to the list. I think Representative McWilliams is doing a good job with that bill, but eventually we're going to have to do more, and I think that's what you're saying as well.
Yes, and I haven't talked to McWilliams on this at all, but I think from what I can read on him, he's not a farmer, and it looks to me like he's representing his constituents. And I think that's important that the legislature looks at that and says, what is best for our constituents and for the people of North Dakota and for the industry of agriculture. I look at agriculture. It was the first industry here, and I think it'll be here, I hope, forever. And we're not going back to the way it used to be. I don't want to go back to my great-great-grandmother's sod house on the prairie where she had 7 kids and was widowed. I don't want to go back to the way agriculture used to be. It's a romanticized view of what it was.
Yeah.
And I think having laws that preserve the way things used to be is antiquated. And it's time that we look ahead and say, how can we prepare for the future of agriculture in North Dakota? And that includes far more than only second cousins.
That's an interesting point. I want to just end on an anecdote. I remember years ago there was it was some Eastern European nation, and the people there, it was not a real high quality of life. Let me put it that way. I mean, they're living in like huts. So, but anyway, there was some rare mineral that a Canadian mining company found, and they wanted to come out and they wanted to build this mine. And all the environmentalists were out there. They were saying, "Oh no, it's going to destroy these people's way of life. They have such a rustic, such a quaint way of life." And then the documentarian who was covering this interviewed some of the people, and they're like, "We're living in huts." Right? Like it's great for some activists from Los Angeles to come here and talk about how great it is to live in a hut. I'd rather not live in a hut anymore. I'd like to change and not live that way anymore. And I kind of feel like some of the people who are saying, let's protect the family farm are protecting something that maybe could be improved upon. I mean, I don't want to diminish the family farm. I think there's a lot of great things about it, but you got to evolve and things got to change. So hopefully that comparison made sense. Maybe it didn't at all. Katie, thank you for your time.
I think it does.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Plain Talk Podcast. Remember, new episodes out every Monday through Friday, right away in the morning. So you can listen in the morning, you can listen in the afternoon, you can listen when you want to. If you go to sayanythingblog.com, click the Plain Talk Podcast link, you can find all the different ways to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed already, you can listen on your smartphone, your computer, your whatever device you want, your tablet. There's the RSS feed there if you need to plug that into the podcasting platform of your choice. Or there's links to subscribe via iTunes, via Google, via Pocket Cast, via Spotify, however you want to do it. A lot of you listening via Spotify. I in fact, just learned when I started this podcast, I just learned that Spotify had podcasts. I use Spotify every day. I didn't even know that. Hey, you learn something new every day. Also, if you have any feedback on the show, if you have any problems subscribing in any way, email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.